Dennis Kuhn,
Here.
Fred Knapp,
Here.
Jeff Hamstra, Ken Cawthorn.
Ken Cawthorn is here. I'm running late, but I am here.
Okay. Thomas Hayes,
Here.
Dave Gibbons,
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay. On to the first item, the approval of the minutes legal action report. Assume everyone's read it. Anyone care to put forth a motion?
This is Dennis. I'll move. I'll also comment that it kind of been considering all the discussion that went on, but it does hit the high point. So I'll move to accept.
Second
Motion.
All right. Any objections? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Item 3, call to the audience. We have some audience members here. They're on the agenda, so you'll wait.
Sorry, I missed part of that.
Oh, well, this is the call to the audience, so this is your opportunity to speak to the committee here. If you have anything to say, you're not required, but.
Yeah, I'd like to speak something.
But also, if you're just for organization, if you're here to talk about the earth and building materials, we do have an agenda item for item 5. So you can save your comments for agenda item 5 if that's what you would like to comment about.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what you're all here for?
Yes.
Okay.
Looks like David.
Nobody online is,
David's raised his hand.
okay, David.
Hi, good morning. David Godleski, Southern Arizona Home Builders Association. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. It's come to my attention that there's an issue with one of the provisions related to the GFCI requirements for HVAC units. And my understanding is that is going to be a requirement that there had been a grace period, but that's going to be required starting September 1st. And I'm aware of some studies and some concerns about the industries and manufacturers' ability to be able to meet that deadline. I'm trying to get up to speed as quickly as possible, so I'm not able to speak to it in a detailed manner, but I just wanted to get that on the committee's radar. I know that many of the other communities throughout the state had either extended the implementation date beyond September 1st or are considering some sort of a temporary delay in that to try and kind of address what the potential concerns from the HVAC industry might be. So I just wanted to see if that could potentially be something that the committee would look at or provide some additional perspective from when the code was adopted, why that, just kind of what the thoughts were about the date. So just wanted to get that on the radar in short.
Okay, yeah, that hit my email this morning. Too late for today's agenda, but it's on the radar.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else online? Seeing no hands. We'll go to item 4, the IECC amendments. For our guest speaker, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Tucson-Pima County Joint Consolidated Code Committee for having me for a third round of discussions on the 2024 IECC code amendments and adoption from City of Tucson and Pima County. So while we're getting the presentation pulled up, I'll just do a brief overview for those who aren't familiar with the topic. Pima County and City of Tucson just recently adopted the 2024 IECC energy codes. Pima County Board Chair Allen directed staff to explore the amendments that were proposed and approved by this committee and Planning and Zoning to look for better alignment with our respective climate plans between City of Tucson and Pima County and our emissions reductions goals. So I have very much enjoyed my opportunity to come speak with this committee. This will be my third time to revisit all of the amendments to IECC codes, specifically 406, 405, and some of the residential opportunities to overview not only what we're here to do, the 120-day timeline that Pima County staff was given, and then a subsequent deep dive after our discussion in the July meeting. So in the July meeting, we reviewed several of the amendments that the code committee had proposed, agreed with a handful of them, looked for opportunities in some of them, and then took an action item to take a deeper dive in newer permit data, in alignment with committee member Kuhn and some of the extensive conversations that we had in the last meeting, to look at further opportunities and where we can maybe standardize or integrate some energy efficiency components. Specifically, we looked at the threshold components and size, and we, thankfully to City of Tucson and Pima County Development Services teams, we got the raw data for both jurisdictions and we're able to kind of deep dive into the size threshold. Really interesting findings, and have a potential proposal for you today to consider or to continue discussion, and we report back to our Board of Supervisors. This is where we are. These are the considerations we've made. This is how we want to continue to integrate climate and emissions work into future discussions and future code amendments that might be coming before Mayor and Council and the Pima County Board of Supervisors. So that's a brief recap of why I'm here. And just for the record's sake, the 120-day timeline does bring us to a report back to our Pima County Board of Supervisors on September 8th. So we'll be putting a study session agenda item likely on that date or the subsequent meeting date. And we'll be providing memorandum of our work with the Joint Code Committee and the recommendations and the discussion items and the areas of opportunity that we can collectively consider going forward. So without further ado, and I will not take all 2 hours of your meeting this time, because I think we had some hyper-specific recommendations from the Code Committee and some subsequent data analysis that I'll be presenting back to you for consideration. So next slide, please. So just as a recap, what we are looking at and why I am here from my lane in the climate work and emissions calculations perspective. The table up top is the 2021 emissions that we are collectively, both City of Tucson and Pima County, are looking to get a 60% collective reduction on for the region. These regional emissions do come from the Pima Association of Governments, and so they do all of our calculations, and so we can collectively do a regional approach to this. Pertaining to the codes, what we're going to be talking about and where we thought that there might be opportunity with IECC is specific to commercial energy and industrial energy. Even more hyper specifically for purposes of this meeting, we are going to focus on the commercial energy space. And per our discussion and the minutes that were just approved, we did not find opportunities at this time and retained the deletion to energy monitoring, which is not in compliance with Arizona Revised Statute or Pima County Code, and residential lighting. So we retained those full deletions with opportunities for discussion or potential opt-in for automatic receptacle controls, renewable energy readiness, and the size threshold for energy monitoring or energy credits. So what was discussed with Joint Code last meeting is kind of, is there opportunities for both the city and the county to continue to explore if permit applicants come in and say, hey, if we had a menu of these energy credit options and we want to voluntarily do it, is there incentives that we could consider from a government perspective to better ready or use the energy credit menu? But a lot of this really honed in on the size threshold. So next slide, please. So this is the slide, and it's just a recap from the last meeting, just to bring everyone back to the size threshold and the permitting data that fed into the consideration of the 2024 IECC. So this is the old data. So what we discussed in the last meeting is the adopted amendment, which changed the threshold to the 50,000 square foot capacity and the 100,000 square foot compliance. We said, you know, for purposes of discussion, is there a way to kind of do a median point? Maybe not the 2,000, 5,000 or certain build outs, but is there a median point? And let's look at our permit data and see what square footage we're actually permitting. So this is the breakout of what was considered by the code committee when the original amendments were created. And as you can see with City of Tucson and Pima County, a lot of what we permit is in that 25,000 square foot or less. So the discussion follow-up was looking at newer data to see if that threshold still is retained in the 2024, 2025 permitting data. And are there any opportunities within that? And I will say, very interesting data. And we have pivoted from proposing a size threshold blanket and looking into permit occupancy types instead, because if you look at the collective data from the past year, while 25,000 square feet is the biggest batch of permits that both the city and the county do approve or permit, the scopes of work are incredibly variant. And I think this is a lot of what the code committee discussed in terms of applicability to certain types of industries and the workforce, and does it interrupt workflow, and do we have the capacity to do this within certain size thresholds? So a good amount of the permits that we issue are for hospitality. So hospitality, restaurants, hoteling, very, very unique scopes of work by which you have to keep temperatures in certain areas, a certain threshold for other regulations and compliance, and you have to keep temperate kind of milieu spaces. And so hospitality really was, we started to look at this as occupancy types after we looked at the 25,000 square foot threshold. And I said, you know, they're too variant to make a standard. So energy credits would be appropriate if a builder was so inclined to do so, kind of leaning into the opt-in opportunity. But to make a consideration that is a blanket statement, the types of permits that are coming in, the types of applications that are being reviewed are very, very wildly different in terms of what energy efficiency model would apply. So instead of the 25,000 square foot threshold, we decided to look at a couple of different things. And I will go to the next slide. So this was the other thing. So the 406-1 requiring buildings greater than 5,000 square feet to provide energy load management for commercial facilities. So in June, when we discussed some of this with Joint Code Committee, workforce was a big concern, and again, types of industry that were applying for permits, with a potential look forward with more appropriate for warehouses or large facilities, which have automated, lower occupancy, more opportunity for automation. So next slide, please. So we're still going to focus on those two components today, but move away from the size threshold and go more into the occupancy type. And so that's where we get into opportunities with S1, S2 storage and warehousing. So we have seen opportunities in this space because it is an industry potentially that has more automation capacity. Also does represent about 8 to 10% of the commercial emissions, which is small comparatively. I think next could be an exploration of office buildings. But warehouses have probably the lower end of the human occupancy and can have more automation requirements. So in the 2024 to 2025 collective data from City of Tucson and Pima County, storage and warehousing permits represented 18 and 19% of the applications respectively. So, I mean, that's a good portion of the applications for storage and warehousing. There were 32 unique permits for City of Tucson and 12 permits for Pima County. City of Tucson average square foot for storage and warehousing was 38,512 with a pretty vast range, as you can see, from 814 or 894 square feet to over 200,000. Based on the size threshold for that 50,000 square foot, 66% of those permits would not apply for the energy monitoring or energy efficiency credits. So I think that's an opportunity zone because I think there could be more standardized applicability to that, and that was discussed by the code committee in June pertaining to things we might want to consider as we look through the data. So Pima County's permit data, 12 permits for storage and warehousing with a average square foot of 24,000. Little bit smaller of a range than City of Tucson's, but pretty wide range. And 91% of those permits would not qualify for energy efficiency credit or monitoring based on the size threshold. So like I said, these types of facilities only make up about 8 to 10% of the commercial energy and emissions group, but could be a really easy win from the emission standpoint and from the applicability standpoint for any sort of energy efficiency consideration. Based on the 2018 Commercial Buildings and Energy Consumption Survey, that is old, they are still doing the 2020 data. The warehouse and storage energy consumption make up about 17% of commercial buildings and 18% of commercial floor space. So where we have opportunities are HVAC load management, lighting, and renewable readiness. We already know that there is building envelope requirements, but could there be some opportunities in the energy credits or the energy monitoring? Next slide, please. So just to break down, and again, I promised you I would not take the whole 2 hours for this. And I think this is the first step. It is a small portion of the emissions, but I do think it is applicable. And I think it is a first step to consideration to larger things like office buildings or those sorts of permits. This is what was originally proposed that was adjusted by Joint Code, City of Tucson, Pima County, and just underlying frame of reference, Pima County did adopt the code amendments, but have been also directed to go back and look for additional opportunities. So we have officially adopted these code amendments, but need to come back to the board with opportunities to consider going forward. And so with the original square foot compliance thresholds, I wanted to kind of showcase the City of Tucson and Pima County permits. So as you can see in Pima County, only one is over the 50,000 foot, but 10 other buildings, and the size breakouts are as such. And then City of Tucson, you see the breakout of below 50,000 square feet, and those are 21 unique facilities. And we had the counts of each facility by size. And City of Tucson and Pima County both have a good amount of facilities in that 5,000 square foot range for storage and warehousing. So this is what we have found as of now for Joint Code Committee to consider if there are opportunities and how would those look for something like storage and warehousing S1. Now, I will say when we went through this data, we took out I don't know the appropriate term for this outside of mechanic facilities.
This is Clayton. Auto repair shops
Auto
are
repair
also
shops.
classified as S1, and we pulled those out.
Yes. So we pulled those out, and we pulled out some of the office structures that kind of hovered between S1, S2. We took any permit out that had a residential component to it. So just know when we did the raw data, we took everything with an S1 and then distilled out other things. We took out all residential. But mechanic shops and office.
This is Dennis. What about so-called Logix facilities? Amazon Processing Center, UPS?
Those would still be included in this data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And in some cases, we just had facility type and address. So it wasn't unique to, I wasn't able to ascertain who the permit is issued to outside of size threshold, address, and occupancy type and location.
But that type of facility would still be here.
Included in here, yeah. But we did take out auto mechanics.
But that would be a workshop.
Right.
More under the occupancy classes in the IECC as opposed to being storage.
And this is Clayton, just to supplement Sarah, what we were really aiming at is trying to comb through the data to find specific uses that could be targeted with some intention to mask the operator or the tenant, right? So we're not targeting tenants, we're targeting uses. And then with the recognition that there is some overlap. There's mixed use buildings, there's buildings such as auto mechanic shops that are still classified in the same category as storage and warehousing. But again, not to say that those don't count. We just did not include them in the data for, the opportunity zone.
I believe Dan
Yeah.
has his hand up.
Yeah, hi, this is Dan. I might add to what Clayton and Sarah said that we also in the county we had some open storage for like RV vehicles and so forth that just basically have a roof over the top of them, but they would still be classified as S1 storage. So we removed those also.
So
Thanks.
yeah, thank you, Dan. And just to kind of reiterate so everyone's on the same page, the intent there was for the data that you see on the screen to be accurately represented of actual storage and warehousing buildings, regardless of use classification.
This is Sarah. To add one more final layer before discussion, there's a couple different ways that we can consider this type of use. And for the code committee discussion could be any permit that would come in for this use, regardless of size, have some energy efficiency components built in, because we know there's low occupancy. We know there could be a lot more automation that wouldn't interfere potentially with workflow, or type of business or type of occupancy use. So is there an opportunity? And I know this is a small bite out of the emissions pie, but it's a great start. If we could make some considerations and just start to think about this going forward on opportunities when a new energy code comes out. We thought that this was a good opportunity to, again, regardless of size, look at energy efficiency components, because it would be the least interruptive to the type of use that the facility has.
Well, it's not like an office that's full of people that are gonna circumvent.
Right, right.
everything.
Sure. So this is Ken Cawthorn. Sorry I was late, but I was listening, so I was online here. I guess I wanted to, before I dive into this, I wanted to just point at some, I guess, identify. I did reach out to many jurisdictions that have adopted the 24 code. And what I found is not one of them has received any documentation on 406, section 406, not one. That means Phoenix, Chandler, Tolleson, Avondale, Glendale, and those were the ones I discussed. They all had documentation that they passed the 2024 energy code, the ComCheck. But what they had was the individual electric, they had the individual mechanical, and they had the individual architectural, not the full ComCheck that includes section 406. Not one of them has ever received
Extra energy efficiency.
none of them. And yet all those jurisdictions still have 406 as written. So none of those, not one has received it. Now,
And you're saying they're not enforcing.
they're not enforcing it because they don't know how. They all admitted they don't have personnel and they don't have the ability to verify this. Now, the city of Phoenix did say they received one that had 406 documented, but it was documented improperly. It was 100% electrical items. And they said they got the full 89 points or whatever it is. And
you can even do that.
you can't do that, right? And they realized that, but they didn't know how to enforce it and they let it go. So that's where everybody's at. And so if somebody wants to, I think what they're doing is first submitting it with just the individual comm checks without 406, seeing if it goes through. If it goes through, then they're fine. If somebody does object to it, then they'll probably do an energy model. But right now, nobody is enforcing it. And then you've got the city of Mesa, which adopted the exact same thing we did. So they copied our amendments exactly, which was nice to see. So a little pat on the back for all of us, right? Then you had Queen Creek and Scottsdale are using the 2021, and they don't have any notification when they're going to even consider the 24. And Tempe is still using the 18, although they have the 2024. But they have the 2024 also, but they could still use the 18 until the end of this year. And then you have the city of Goodyear, which completely eliminated section 406. They just got rid of it. So those are all the jurisdictions I've reached out to, and that's where we're at. So nobody is following right now section 406 that I'm aware of, even though they've adopted these on many, like Phoenix and so on, since January. So it's almost been eight and a half months, and they still haven't seen anybody document it. So that's where I was struggling. Then going into the S buildings. So with the S buildings, thank you, Dennis, for letting me borrow this. If you look at the section 406.1, actually, that is the energy credits for the S occupancy. You need to get 57 points. So you have to go through those 30 items that we have and figure out how you can get to 57 points. Or you could do an energy model, right? For the load management.
But the point of the energy model is it would achieve the same bottom line energy usage.
Correct.
Complying with those 57 points. At least that's what it's supposed to do.
Correct.
But maybe you're doing it in a different way.
Right. No, yeah, you would. So exactly. Maybe you're doing it in a different way, and that energy model would document that you're still complying with that additional energy efficiency, and doing it in a different way, right? So the other one with the load management, renewable energy and load management, for an S1 and S2, you're going to need 90 points, and realize most of that is probably going to be renewable energy, because let's face it, the load management is going to be expensive and more challenging to implement. So most likely what they'll do is they'll just put in solar. I think they got to do up to like a half kW. I think it's just under a half kW a square foot. Maybe it's half a watt. I'm sorry, half a watt under a square foot. It's just under that. I think it was like 0.4 or something like that. And that'll get you the full points for the renewable and load management, which is that 406.1.2. So that's where that is. But needless to say, I think to comply on, if I were doing the project, I would push to do, rather than try to document these, I would push to be doing an energy model. And I would push that first. And I would do the energy model until we can show that it passes, because that would be far less cumbersome for us on the engineering side than to try to pick these 30 options and figure out which ones give us enough points to then, and the documentation that goes behind that. So whereas an energy model is just you submit the energy model. So that's where that would end up. I would guess, and that's what I would do. I don't know what other firms would do, but that's what I would say.
To reiterate that point in a different way, the problem is that method in the IECC is so cumbersome and labor intensive to comply with the method, that's the real problem with it. It's not the goal of saving the energy, it's the way that they're getting there.
Right, you have to choose, you as a group, right? It's the 8 architect, engineers have to get together and decide which of these 30 options we're gonna go with that's most cost effective and gives
But
us
you
enough
can't-
points.
You can't look at them and say, oh, well, we'll just do these,
Right,
because you actually then have to do your calculations.
Correct.
And see where you
so
end up.
you have to do a
And so
design.
there's all this back and forth
Yeah.
iteration to decide what's gonna be the
Yeah.
best solution. And just because we as designers can do that, it's a whole different matter of what's all those things gonna cost that we have to do.
Right.
And so then you almost have to bring a contractor on board
Do pricing.
to provide pricing. And
Right.
it's not a one-time pricing thing. It's, again, it's gotta be iteration back and forth. Now, the energy model sort of does that as well,
Correct.
but it's approaching it in a different way.
It is, because what the energy model can do is identify what areas we need to improve on to get to the percentage we need to pass. So that's the beauty of the energy model.
So is it crystal clear in the code, the way it's written, that anybody can use that
Yes.
energy model in
Yep.
lieu of?
It is. And it's both in here and in 90.1. I brought 90.1 because I've been going through it too. So it's been updated to the 2025. So far less amendments. And it has that whole 406 section, which is, in this one is 9 something or other, and it has changed significantly. So they've changed the way they're doing it. They're not separating 406.1 and 406.2. They've now combined them into one section. But you have to have so many of your points have to be from the renewable to load management, so much percentage of your points.
But the ICC's been looking towards ASHRAE
Correct.
for how they're gonna do the updates,
Right.
so.
This was printed
You're implying that.
prior to when I think the
So
initial,
the
yeah,
2027 IECC.
we'll probably use
comes out,
25.
They'll probably look to ASHRAE 2025. and
Right.
Likely that section 406 isn't gonna be the same as it is now
Correct,
when the 2027 comes out.
yes. So,
So
So-
you understand how the design process works now? Because he does his part, I do my part. There may be some communication if there's an issue that can be easily
Well,
solved.
oftentimes there's a lot of
Now you're asking-
communication, but.
Now you're
it's-
asking all of us, plus him, the contractor, to sit in the room and do all these complicated what-if scenarios, which you can't do in one meeting.
Right.
That I know of. It's just insanely complex.
And
It-
the client says, I can't afford it.
right. It is,
I just.
it is. And
And he also said, well, I just built my other building in Phoenix and I didn't have to do all that.
correct. And that's where I was getting confused because people are saying, we just did a building in Phoenix and didn't have to comply to this. And that's why I made all these calls. Like I said, Chandler, Tolleson, Avondale, Glendale, Mesa, Scottsdale, Queen Creek, Gilbert, Tempe, and Goodyear. So I called 10 different, talked to all of them. The guy that reviews them, all of them said they just get the electrical comm check, the mechanical comm check, and architectural, and they pass it. So then when I asked about 406, some of them knew about it, and they just said, we don't have the ability to review that or enforce it, is what some of them did say. Others of them said, we're trying to enforce it, but it's been challenging because we don't have the personnel.
Which is
So-
why,
so that-
if they were forced to comply, everybody's gonna go to the energy model.
Yes. That's my opinion. Yes, that is my opinion. Because it just seems so much easier to do than energy model. So then what we do is if we got these S1 and S2 and we're going to reduce them down to 2,000 or 5,000 square feet, realize they'll now need to do an energy model for those.
And I would say that would be more cost effective than.
Oh, by far. My fees would be significantly less than the energy model.
But you're paying an energy model.
And that doesn't include your fees if we then have to do the documentation for
How
406.
does an energy model achieve the climate goals that Sarah's been talking about that we're trying to move toward?
So the intent there is that the energy model is going to document that we still comply to everything in here and and are just as efficient even without doing these additional things. So that is the difference. Now we did modify our equation, and I don't have that handy, but because remember the equation on the energy model was you had to be 20% better than code, and we couldn't figure out why. So we took that, we took that out. So in section 407.2, we took out the 20% better than code because we weren't sure how to do that, but it does take into account the additional energy credits. So because the equation is you have to meet the code, and then you have to be the percentage better by whatever number of points you needed. It takes that as a percentage, and you have to be that much percent better. So if you needed 90 more points, it takes so it's got an equation where you take, you got to be, let's say it's that you gotta have to be 10% better to get to the
So
to
I
meet the code.
understand for electrical or lighting, better means less wattage allowed. So if the base code number says I get 0.7 of a watt per square foot, then we go to the 406 and it says that has to be multiplied by 0.85 or some number like that.
Right.
That would be the driving point that the energy model would be looking for then, to get that point.
Right, so it just looks at the total number of points you need. So like for an office building, it would be, or for let's just say it was a storage building, you'd need 57 energy credits. So it just says 1 minus 57 divided by 1,000, and you need that much. That's much more that's percentage of how much better you need to be. You just ratio. Right. So they're basically saying they're taking what would be the improvement in energy that is on these additional energy credits and making you document that in your energy model.
I didn't make the connection that the points were actually related, like you're going to be this
In the energy model,
better.
yeah.
But it worked, okay.
Yeah.
And then very far downstream, this is Sarah, we would take all of that energy use from TEP data from PAG and calculate that into emission impact.
Right.
And so but that's further down the road for us. But I have a question of clarification and potential discussion. So the ASHRAE, the alignment with the future 2027 and the ASHRAE component that you discussed earlier, because we just approved the amendments as amended, the IECC code with amendments, sorry. We did ours in June. You guys, City of Tucson did theirs in spring.
It was December adoption with July 1 implementation.
July 1 implementation. Do we know, because I'm thinking if ASHRAE and the code as it exists now are in misalignment with the intent for the 2027 code and ASHRAE to be in better alignment, is there opportunity to build in, dependent on when the potential adoption of a 2027 code? Because the other thing I don't want to do is puzzle piece codes together or opportunities if a new code would be considered and we integrate data like this into whether or not we use energy modeling that may look different in one set of regulations versus
and historically, we've updated every 6 years, so we'd be skipping the 2020. If we just did this normal, skip the 2027, and then we'd all be staring at the 2030 and say, holy cow, what are we?
Or maybe that answers my question, that annual code adoption, like we wouldn't go to 2027 from 2024.
It generally, historically it hasn't, but maybe this is a different kind of issue. Maybe it needs to.
And part of this is telling the story of the puzzle pieces. And I think in our justification and whatever we prepare for materials for our board to review, we will talk about the overall 2024 IECC energy efficiency savings period overall with the building envelope successes and some of that. I think the estimate was 16.5% in total energy savings was the estimate for the 2024 compared to the 2018, which we were both adopting. But if there is, and again, this is open for discussion about whether there's anything we can do now, or if we are considering a 2027 adoption that is more in alignment with ASHRAE building forward with this as a component.
This is Clayton. Just want to point out a couple of things for clarification. The city of Tucson since 1958 until 2006 was on a 3-year cycle. So they matched the model code adoption. Every time a new model code came out, city of Tucson was matching that all the way up until 2006 when we moved to a 6-year cycle, skipping a cycle. So at that point of clarification, if we went back to a 3-year cycle, it would not be unprecedented for borough code adoption history. Another point, if an applicant seeks to use a future code that's been published that we do not have adopted, it does require an appeal, but 99% of the time the city of Tucson allows that. We allow applicants to use a future code. We scrutinize someone requesting to use a previous code. So you can always use the current code or a future one that hasn't been adopted yet. But we do require, if someone wants to use an alternative code to the one that's adopted, they have to use it in its entirety. They can't pick and choose which chapters or portions of one code and portions of another code. It's either all or none, and it's current or future.
Okay, to kind of sum this up, whatever the threshold you've set, they're going to end up doing an energy model.
That's my,
Because in terms of fees, whoa, it's cheaper.
Right.
Would you say?
yes. So I would think that a fee to do, the problem is the minimum fee that I would estimate to do an energy model would be $6,000 to $10,000. So think about that. What if you got a 2,000, if you got 2,000 square foot warehouse? Your fees are, your total fees for all the consultants is probably less than that, right? Or about a 2,000 square foot warehouse is probably close to that.
Right.
So it'll double the fees,
Yeah. Well,
but it's still going to be cheaper than trying to do the documentation,
the energy model.
right? The energy model, right?
And there is an energy modeling workforce.
There is, yes.
There's not a huge amount of energy modelers.
There's not.
No.
And so that's something we talk about in our own buildings. And we think about energy modeling and
Right.
how we look at our portfolio. So that is something I understand.
Right.
Very clearly.
That was
It's a-
one of the confusing
And this can, yeah,
factors.
more people are farming that out overseas. You know, to have, people from another country do them, and they just send them the plans, and they'll do an energy model and send it back.
The trouble is, it's being run on a computer, and
Right.
then the old garbage in, garbage out
Correct.
thing applies. And if you don't have the ability for the plan checkers to understand it and check it, it may be, it's just all a bunch of eyewash. And I see old plans sometimes that seem to have eyewash in them instead of real information.
Correct.
This is Sarah with a question. Wouldn't an energy model show cost savings over time, potentially?
Yeah, so, I mean, an energy model is always helpful. There's no doubt. So it would, the goal on these energy models is basically to document that they are complying with the energy code, so that they are so much % better than the energy code. And if once they get to that point, I think most code officials and reviewers are just going to check the box and be okay. But it'll show that it documents that. If it's done properly, that's the intent, is that it will document that it is just as efficient as if you went through and got all these points and had done it. But as Dennis said, we don't know, I mean, because because there's not that many energy modelers out there. And it is challenge, it is a lot of inputting, a lot of data to input. And that data may be input improperly just to try to get the numbers to pass. So, but that's something that I don't know how you would check for unless you are an energy modeler that knows who's an engineer who knows how to go through it.
Well, yeah, those don't require to be sealed, registered, are they?
They are, yes.
Would it be submitted as part of your work or
Yeah.
somebody else sealing it?
It could be that, it could be just about any, it could be that the energy modeler seals it. It could be the mechanical, it could be the architect. I don't know. That's a good question.
The rules of professional practice though in Arizona, you're only supposed to stamp something that you've
You've done.
knowledge and experience to.
So it would have to
able-
be the energy modeler would have to seal it. But what if they're from out of the country? So, yeah.
This is there to add to this, and I say this because we're going through this right now, in terms of energy modeling and projects. To do energy efficiency. Nobody who's doing the project wants to use someone else's data. So who's the validator of the energy model, or is it us? Paul Clayton, who's gonna give the stamp of approval? So that's a limitation. I have another question for clarification, if that's okay. So IECC code, so there's gonna be a 2027 one. Does it come out annually? Or every?
So the codes,
Every 5,
yeah, this is Ken. So the codes come out every 3 years, the updated, but we only adopt them every 6. So we,
Okay.
One more point of clarification. The I codes come out every 3 years through a consensus process. The ASHRAE code is a living document that changes,
As needed.
all the time.
as
We get
as
amendments. Yeah, we get amendments all the time.
Because I'm going back macro. I'm out of warehouses. I'm out of storage facilities. I'm going back to the original. So our goal is to reduce emissions by 60% from our 2021 levels by 2030. And so part of that is telling the puzzle pieces of all the inputs that are going into that. And having some course opportunity between 2025 and 2030 for our respective jurisdictions. So this brings me back to the 20, even though I know we just adopted the 2024, and if 2027 IECC is going to be in more alignment with ASHRAE, is that it versus trying to go back to the adopted amendments that have been modified? Is there a forward opportunity that's still in alignment with this 2025 to 2030 timeline that we can consider to bring back to the board? And granted, I've studied the 2024 codes much more than I have the ASHRAE component. So if ASHRAE has a more reliable or accessible, because what I'm hearing is accessibility of these components. I think the energy credit model is a little bit tricky because you pick and choose your menu items and do an equation by which it's a weighted variable that could be very different from my building to your building. Knowing that the North Star and the directive we've been given by our elected officials is to think through this mechanism that we're trying to get this 60% collective reduction. Obviously, industrial emissions is going to be a huge part of this. There's other pieces of this pie, but from a code perspective in the commercial side, is there something we should be focusing on more in the ASHRAE component that's in alignment with the 2027 to potentially bring back for consideration?
So this is Ken. My thought is even under the ASHRAE component, they do clearly allow you to use the energy model to avoid having to document with these credits. So what the difference that I see in the credits is they've combined them now instead of being and they've changed the square footage too. Let me just find that. Sorry. They've they have combined them now into one. They don't say 2,000 square feet
It's not a
is,
step.
and then 5,000 square feet is this. I think it's all, yeah, I think it's all 5,000 square feet. I'm sorry, that wasn't going through it as quickly as I thought.
And I'm sorry, I'm throwing in a total curveball into this whole discussion.
Right, right. But the bottom line is I think that, so now they've just said, buildings, new buildings, exceeding 2,000 square feet, period, have to, meet all this stuff. And what they're saying is a percentage of your credits have to be the renewable and load management credits, is what they're saying. So I tend to, if I had to pick my side here, I'd probably agree rather than jumping to the 2027 so quickly, because it's probably not that 2027 code. If it was anything like the 26 code or 24 code, won't be out till 2020, late 27, maybe 28. My thought is, if we're going to make a change, I almost like your idea of stepping into it with different occupancy classes, maybe, and try that as a stepping stone for this. Either way, I think no matter which one we do, I know on my side of it, I'm going to be pushing the energy model, because the ASHRAE is now, because you combined all the points into one block, so you have 45 points you have to go through, or 45 credits you have to go through and figure out which ones you're going to do. And just the idea of that is kind of overwhelming. And so I would end up saying, just do the energy model, and we'll add things to that energy model once we've done it, so we could pinpoint what we need to do that would best get us to the points we need. Or it wouldn't be points there, it'd be just best get us to the being in compliance that we need.
Dan has his hand raised.
Dan.
Yeah, hi, this is Dan. Hey, I just wanted to kind of add to what Ken and actually Clayton had said. Right now, there's only 5 2027 I-codes published that are available on the electronic version. And it's essentially property maintenance, international private sewage disposal,
Dan,
the pool and spa code, and the zoning code. So we've got, yeah, I keep breaking up, don't I?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, there's only 5 2027 I-codes published right now. And I agree with you, Ken, the 2027 energy code probably won't come out until, if it's like the 2024, it's probably until late 2027, early 2028.
Yeah.
If you heard me.
Yep, we did. Thank you, Dan. So this is Ken.
Okay.
So I guess that's why my thought is now it'd be a couple years before we can evaluate, and then we can evaluate it again later. I mean, that when it does come out, we could really look at it and see if it does make sense. But if we were going to do something more immediate, I would think maybe the building, rather than either lowering our threshold of square footage or a different building type. The only problem I have with a different building type is, seriously, these 2,000 to 5,000 square foot levels. I just think doing an energy model for a 2,000 square foot storage facility or warehouse is costly, and I don't know what the benefit is, there.
I'd like to comment on that a little bit. I heard two things, a mention of perhaps hospitality or food service being considered, because there's a lot of energy use there. And that's, I could comment on that, but also on the storage thing. You've got this difference between corporate ownership of facilities where there's the ability to pay for this stuff versus local small town owners that are just trying to get by. May have a contractor that finally decides that I want to build a 5,000 square foot pre-engineered building in my backyard, so all my machines aren't, just sitting out getting baked in the sun. But now you're suddenly putting a big burden on a local company to do that, whereas Amazon comes in and builds a big building and yeah, well, we want them here because of all the convenience and all that, but they also can afford to pay for all this stuff. It's such a small percentage of their whole operation. I really concerned about the burden on the little guys and even like self-storage facilities. But I can see a different side of the self-storage. You may not know, but I'm also involved in the outdoor lighting code process. And many of the recent self-storage facilities that have been constructed are horrible from an outdoor lighting code point of view because they put these big windows right on the corner of their building and they leave their indoor lights on all night long. And one could argue that's a great deal of light trespass. And there's nothing our outdoor code can do to deal with it. Actually, the energy code can, and as adopted, the 2024 will, because they will now be required to have occupancy sensors on that indoor lighting. They probably were not required because they called it egress corridors under the old code. But even those facilities may be being built by big corporate entities as opposed to mom and pop's building. And now a mom and pop wants to build that building, has to do the energy code, which is going to make them maybe have to put in a much more expensive HVAC system, build a better envelope, put more controls on the lighting. So they're not only on the upfront design, but you've also got the actual cost of construction. And it's going to hit these small businesses that are they're running on the edge anyway, any local business. And the same argument about running on the edge is all the local restaurants. I mean, how many actually survive? They spent all this money to build the thing and they're closed in a year.
This is Sarah. Point of clarification. We actually got away from the 25,000 square foot threshold because there was so much diversity in the permit types, specifically hospitality, that we wanted to get away from. Because in part, it's too nuanced to put a standard on without knowing more. So we deviated from the size threshold because of the burden on certain permit types, which is why we shifted to the S group, because there's less variation. There's still variation, but there's less variation than something like hospitality and that burden on local businesses and hospitality just in general. But
so this is Ken. So maybe a first step would be we take the S build occupancies, but instead of bringing it all the way down to 2,000 and 5,000, maybe we bring it down to 5,000 and 10,000 or something like that, somewhere, or 10,000 and 25,000, somewhere where at least now the building cost is going to be high enough that the energy model is not going to be double the A&E fees. It'll be a percentage of them, but it won't be a huge burden now. And so that might be something to consider.
I know I've worked on a number locally owned projects. They tend to be relatively small doing the storage things. And the big ones, well, we're not designing that many of them because they all seem to be out of town designers even, but they're being corporate entities that probably can afford more so than the local company.
Well, and it's a big enough cost now, construction wise, that that additional fee is not gonna make them say, oh, we just can't do this.
I have another question. This is Sarah. And this is going to expose that I'm not an architect or an engineer. I know you all know that.
Okay.
But say I'm Sarah's storage shop and I plan on opening 5, 6 facilities. I could do one energy model, because all of my facilities would assumably be similar in size and scope and service. Would I be required to do a unique energy model per permit per facility, or could I use one to apply to many?
So this is Ken. If their orientation is the same, and if they're literally just site adapt plans and they're the exact same, you can use the same energy model. But if typically what we see is because the site is a little different, so they rotate, and when they rotate, they may change where the main entrance is, so the floor plans may slightly change. So then it would have to just be updated to pick up those items. But you can use the same, there's a lot of data that was inputted into those, and you can just modify how the building's been modified at those, yes.
Okay.
So it wouldn't cost as much as starting over. So there'd be some savings involved.
Because I think multiple things exist on the same component as a priority for us as we explore this 120-day opportunity zone. Emissions reductions, yes, but accessibility and standardization is really important. Enforcement is going to be, it's a bear for all of us. And accessibility, we want businesses by types and local businesses to feel that this is something that is not completely burdensome, but eventually is a return on investment for a facility that will have a great lifespan and save money over time on energy use because energy costs are going up or some deviation of that narrative. So we want this to be accessible and standardized in any way possible, which is why we picked the S group. So it's like everything else is a bit too variable and it's a bit too choose your own adventure. And how would we measure the impact of that from an emissions standpoint? And the third is ease of regulation in terms of it's easily accessible. I could get an energy model. I could use an energy model I've used before for a similar type of business. Is there ever opportunity in that? I don't know. And so I just wanted to share that component, that these three things we also feel strongly about, the same things that the code committee feels strongly about, and how can they collectively. So I like the idea of the energy assessment. But is that still in a way inaccessible for folks, knowing that energy modeling is?
So this is Ken. I think as these are required, I think you're going to see more firms doing it. We used to do energy models a lot because we do evaluations. And then the industry tended to drift away from that. And even though LEED was going, and then when LEED came on, we saw more need for that, but then it was very specialized because the people that were reviewing those energy models were energy modelers. So they'd be very picky about what you submitted. So that's when we started saying, unless you do it a lot, you're not going to know. So that's when we started hiring out that. Now, the larger mechanical firms that do more of those have energy modelers that just do energy modeling on staff. And I think you'd see, if it's required on every job, then you'd see we would have one, but it's currently not. And I would think you'd also see those prices come down because there's just going to be more people doing them. They're going to be more efficient at it. When you only do one every so often, you're not as efficient with it. So.
This is Clayton. Just from a logistical side, I will continue to support either altering the size threshold and or focusing on building uses, simply because those are two things that we can easily segregate during our plan review and inspection process. If we get into, changing credits, for example, or changing the values, it significantly alters our ability to ensure compliance. Whereas if we can just say, okay, this building meets the size threshold or it doesn't, it's much, much easier for us to, keep up. And then again, from the logistical side of the market, you know, starting at the higher end of the buildings or starting at the buildings that we know are going to be produced by national corporations, I strongly feel that we can ease into these requirements as more and more energy modelers become available for our applicants to retain.
Right. And I would agree. I totally agree. I think what this is going to do is force us as mechanical engineers to have energy modeling on staff. Which, like I said, we used to do them in-house, but just not, if you don't do them regularly, you're not good at it, and it's challenging.
Dave is signing off.
Okay. Make a note.
And again, this is Sarah, not being an engineer or an architect. Ostensibly, an energy model for a new facility would potentially net a cost benefit for the design,
Definitely, yes.
although upfront cost.
Yeah, so this is Ken. Again, as I said, I think it would be better than just going through. I mean, if we go through these enough, these 30 or 40 items, we'd figure out which ones are, between us and the contractor, which ones are the most effective to get the points.
Just like we did in 2018.
Right.
We settled on energy efficient lighting.
Right.
That was pretty easy, but
Right.
it works on almost every job.
Correct.
And so we settled on it.
Exactly. So I think we figure out that over time. But at the same time, inputting that is probably going to be just as much or more time than doing an energy model. So that's why I think the energy model is, and the energy efficiency is still documented, because you have to meet, you look at those points on the occupancy type, and you have to then be that percentage better, the same as those points to pass.
The model is actually doing two calcs. It does a calc of what the building would be using the bare minimum efficiency equipment to meet the basic code standard.
Yes.
And then it sets a target of what you have to meet to comply with 406.
Correct.
And in order to meet that target, then you're going to input saying you're building a better envelope by picking different windows,
Right.
picking more insulation, whatever. You're picking better lights. You're doing more
different
controls
equipment.
on the lights.
Yeah.
You're picking better air conditioning equipment.
Yeah.
And you're potentially adding a renewable energy component to
Correct.
offset buying utility energy.
Yep.
And so.
Yeah, because it does account for.
Compares the two, and it says, okay, you're meeting this new number that you have, that's your new target.
Yeah.
So it's still an iterative thing, but a lot less so than having to run all those numbers.
Right.
That's what it should say.
Yeah, so the energy modeler I did talk to has done a few of these, and he says they have been able to get most of theirs to pass without doing any extraordinary. Now we have to change the mechanical systems, or now we have to go with load management, or change the electrical systems, or add more solar. So they've been able to get through without extraordinary
That's
measures.
telling me that the basic way we're designing things
Is still
better. It's better than code
Correct.
already.
It is.
And
Well, because
And that's part of the story we also need to tell as we
Right.
report back to the board, is there's already improvement.
Right.
And this is what that looks like in a data way, and here's what we
Right.
can add as a layer to that.
So this is Ken. So the code gives a bare minimum for lighting, but he may have some rooms that are significantly less because they're just the room type, however it is. And then, but the code won't account for that. And then mechanically, we need 14.3 SEER, but it might be the only equipment I could get is 15.8 SEER. But the code just says, oh, you're 14.3, you're good, check. And so, but then you add all that up and with an energy model, and now you're that percentage better that you needed to be without doing any of these extra points. So that's what the energy model is documenting.
And it's standardized.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
I have a question, Dennis. You said the 60% improvement from what date?
2021 emissions.
Okay, 2021 to 2030.
Yeah, and so the table that I showed at the beginning is the regions. So all of us here in Pima County, emissions calculated by Pima Association of Governments. And so we have emissions modelers and we're looking respectively, City of Tucson and Pima County have their own climate plans. We're looking at all of our buildings. So, you know, walking the walk that we're hoping to share with the world. And we're doing the same thing. We're doing energy modeling. We're looking at our own buildings, downtown footprint, huge opportunity zone, where we can strategically invest in solar. City of Tucson's doing the same. And so, but there's a chunk of that emissions pie that we can't directly control, but we can influence by ways of how do we support other people doing things that will arguably, hopefully, save them money at the end of the day, not maybe upfront, but thinking through that larger impact from an emissions perspective. But 2021 levels, 60% reduction by 2030 is our goal to hit net zero 2050.
And out of all of those categories of where the emissions are coming from, the buildings are what, like about a quarter of that?
Yeah, I want to say the commercial energy is about 1.3 million metric tons of carbon emissions. Industrial is bigger, residential is a little bit bigger. And so storage and warehousing is about 8%. It's a small piece of this pie, but if it's a win in an area, then it helps us think through other opportunities like office buildings, I think would be a next viable opportunity. Because again, there's standardization there. And then residential is something that we would tackle in its
Anybody building office buildings? Medical office buildings.
Right.
So
Office
buildings in a lot of ways, like a lot of jurisdictions have a lot of the biggest office buildings in town. And so we need to do our own energy modeling on our buildings. A lot of these big office buildings are older. We're looking at things like deferred maintenance and energy efficiency in all one component. So we're doing a very similar activity to this with our own portfolio to ensure that we figure out our emissions footprint and ways to do energy efficiency buildings. From the county's perspective, a big project that I think you all have seen very recently is our main admin east building in 130 West Congress. It was without windows for 3 years. And so we completely did new windows for energy efficiency and a number of other components. And so we're looking at that as a data model for what other investments of that size we could make on our older building inventory. So we also say we are doing the same activity, but looking from a permitting space where we don't have direct control, but could positively influence. And again, we know utility rates are rising. We are seeing this kind of play out with the ACC and some of our utilities. And so if there's ways that we can help think about energy efficiency as a return on investment as well is positive, I think, for everybody. And so that was our task with you all this summer.
Yeah, well, doing a lot of work for small businesses in the town.
Mhm.
First cost is paramount.
Mhm.
I mean, because of financing or whatever reason. There's not even much of a discussion on the cost savings. But we're struggling just to get in the building. And so if we overburden them too much, we're gonna put those small businesses out of business.
Or they just won't build new, they'll just find some old space to move into.
Well, that's why I asked if there was applicability in using an energy model for, like, if I'm one company and I have 5 locations, could I reuse an energy model if it's similar in size and scope? Is there opportunity? Me not knowing this at all, as much as you all do in the shared
It has to be an
expertise.
identical building. It would get submitted with the plans and specs for the building. And to be reviewed, the reviewers are gonna wanna see that that model applies to what they're asking for the permit on now. So if somebody's literally building the same building, and like Ken said, have to be the same orientation and all, then you're not redesigning it. And they'll be getting a discount on their architectural fees and everything develop that way. But as you do infill projects, the lots are different sizes, the setbacks are different. And suddenly the building that fit one lot doesn't fit the other. So in principle, it's got all the same rooms and all the same functions and the same square footage, but it isn't the same building. It gets tugged and pulled and moved and changed. And so really, when we design them, it's a new design. Maybe we copied schedules and selections and things like that from the old, but we're putting it together new. It's gonna need a new energy model, I would think.
And this is Clayton, I'd support that statement. One of the first verifications or screening steps for the plan review is to verify that the data submitted matches the design. So if there's, which unfortunately happens pretty frequently, we get documentation, for a design that doesn't match the building. So it is one of the first screening steps.
So let's say you're doing a 5,000 square foot warehouse. What would the energy modeling cost, you think? Ken?
So I know our office, the lowest cost we would probably be able to do an energy model for at this time is probably about $5,000. So and that would probably go all the way up to about a 10,000 square foot. And then it's probably start going up to as it gets higher. So the 100,000 square foot is probably going to be 10 to 15,000. So it'd be working your way up.
You
But
get economies of scale.
yeah, so if I was going to, what I would recommend if we're going to look at a occupancy type is we reduce it, not a big jump, not going from 150,000 to 2 and 5, but maybe you go from 150 to 25 and 50, or maybe 10 and 25, somewhere in there, is what I would say. Because by the time you do 10,000 or 25,000 square feet, I think the cost to do the energy model is now not as significant of a burden percentage-wise of construction, of total construction and A&E fees. Right.
This is Dennis, when I look at where your permits are, the under 5,000 feet, I would bet there's not very many big out-of-town corporate companies building under 5,000 square foot. Those are all local businesses trying to build some storage to facilitate what they're doing. And they're gonna be burdened by this type of thing.
And I guess this is Ken. So I guess I'm looking at it too. You got a Salad and Go, which is probably the 2,000 square foot one, right? And you have to make, I don't even know if that's 2,000 square feet, right?
I don't think
It's not, okay. Well, you get a McDonald's with a play area, and now you're in the 5,000 square feet. And you're spending an awful lot of money on doing an energy model on a building that's pretty, that.
But what about the
It's very
local
small.
restaurateur that wants to build a restaurant and get some of those corporate customers to buy from a local business?
Right.
Then they don't have the deep pockets to build.
Yeah, that's why I think it has to be a good sized project to be able to pay for, so the energy model is not overburdening.
But this is if we go by square footage alone, not specifically.
Even by occupancy type.
Okay.
So even if it's a storage facility, I think requiring an energy model on a 2,000 or 5,000 square foot building, I think is going to be a burden. Requiring the energy model, even on a storage building, if it's 10 or 25,000 square feet, is going to be less of a burden.
Of course, one thing, we don't even know for sure, like these really small permits, do those buildings even have air conditioning or any type of climate control in them? Because they don't always do that in those types of buildings.
Yeah, so this is Ken, and that's where we have added an item in an amendment in the energy code where we look at low energy buildings. So it has to meet that 1 watt a square, be less than 1 watt a square foot. And we had an exception that says, well, if the doors are typically open all the time, like a auto shop, or if it's not one that's, because
we can transfer warehouse,
yeah,
where you've got it in one side and
right.
out the other, those doors are oftentimes open.
Correct. So, because we could be we could, if you have evap cooling, you will most likely be over the 1 watt a square foot. Or if you have any type of heating, you'll most likely be over the 1 watt a square foot. So, but that's where the exception came in at that, why are we insulating these buildings to that level and all this stuff, and they've got no heating, no cooling, and the doors are typically open. So that's why we had that exception. So I think locally, we got that pretty well covered, that you would then fall under that exception and you wouldn't have to comply.
And this is Sarah, to add a layer just to the occupancy type without being hyper specific. And the reason why I asked about the applicability of one energy code if you're opening up multiple. I think in that 3,000 square foot application, it was one organization that opened up many within the same threshold.
Mm.
And so it wasn't a huge deviation across like multiple industry folks. But this is just a 1 year snapshot, so it may not look the same the next year, but it was representative of an applicant who is opening up multiple sites in the 3,000 square foot, so the under
Yeah,
five.
that's the implication being that could be a deep pockets type of
Mhm.
applicant, or not necessarily just some
Yeah.
Well,
small
it's one
town
thing
local
to
guy
take the
trying
same
to make a
footprint
living.
Yeah.
and change the orientation, but sometimes when you do the site adapt, you have to modify the footprint of the building.
Yeah.
Which means a new model.
So question for time and next steps for the code committee. I think we've talked about the size and building uses proposal. Would something that would be a next step to consider is draft something that reflects those in terms of how we would amend the amendments for your consideration and approval? Because that would need to move back to planning and zoning if we changed this to do anything specific to the occupancy use or energy modeling requirement. And it would be specific to Pima County. Right?
This is Clayton. So the adoption process would need to go through planning and zoning and board of supervisors for a Pima County adoption, or just to mayor and council for a city of Tucson adoption. But I believe there's appetite for consistency. So any amendment that may be going to Pima County will most likely go back to mayor and council so that we can keep the jurisdictions consistent.
So what are we talking? As occupancies, 10,000 square feet as a threshold?
That would be for the 4061 and maybe 25,000 or more for the, either 10 and 25, I would say, or I would say 25 and 50, whichever, either of those two options I think that would be, the options I would look at.
And specifically S occupancy, no residential components. No, I want to be thoughtful that we took out some components of this.
Right, I agree. And I think so. I think that's a really good way to do it, and it would give us a window to see how the industry reacts to it. Yeah.
Okay. So is the size threshold recommendation 10 to 20, inclusion of 10 to 25 or 25 to 50? I love 10 to 25, but that's, where my side of the table is.
I would support 10 to 25. I believe that you're not gonna have a lot of the smaller developers that are gonna be so hard pressed to meet these things.
Right.
I think once they're over the 10,000 square foot, it's sort of a different kind of project.
Yeah, and especially the S occupancies, because let's face it, if a lot of those aren't air conditioned, so they would be under that exception that we have, so they wouldn't have to comply to this. The ones that are air conditioned,
They should comply.
maybe they should comply, right. And they're pretty easy buildings. They're usually not complex. And so the energy model should be, a lot simpler, right?
And to add, this is Sarah, while it's only 8% estimated of our total emissions, it's almost 20% of our applications.
Right.
So that's, I think, substantial. I think that's why we thought it was a win, because if we've got, that quadrant of our applications represented, then we are making meaningful change in the emissions state of affairs.
And this is Clayton. In preparation for the next meeting, we can get a little bit more granular with our data to focus in on that target square footage range and higher to ascertain, are these conditioned buildings or the, local versus national, we can provide some more granular information as well.
Perfect. So, and to finalize this for the committee, so September 8th, we will have to give an update to our board on the 120-day exploration. So I'll be preparing that memorandum. I will share that with the committee to review and put input on, with the next steps being that there will still need to be consideration by the code committee and approval to the language and planning and zoning. Just to specify that there is still input needed to be gathered and action by the committee. So I will prepare that memorandum probably in the next week for, to give you a few weeks with it, provide more context.
Sounds good.
We're done, we are done. We are, thank you, Chair.
Well, thanks for coming.
Over to this amazing group.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 5, earth and wall building materials. And Dave is gone, right? You have an update on what?
This is Clayton. I did not prepare any materials for this discussion item. We are prepared to respond based on what we hear today. But the city's primary goal was the opportunity to hear comments from some interested parties as it relates to this topic. So with that, I would recommend we
Okay,
Here.
we've got Dave Gibbons, who's a structural engineer, working with other structural engineers looking at that item, so. Okay, here's your time to speak up, and please give us your name before you speak for the record.
Sure. My name is Jared Herman. I work for Tucson Adobe. And in anticipation of the future meetings held between this committee and the ad hoc committees that Dave is kind of helping to coordinate, I guess I would bring a few matters that could be the subject of those meetings. Just mention a few of them in addition to the ones that I mentioned last meeting. I'd like to request that the committee consider changing how our building code categorizes the different Adobe types. Currently, the code categorizes Adobe by water absorption and wet compressive strength. And I propose that we shift to categorize Adobe by their material composition, that is, whether there's a stabilizer or no stabilizer. And then creating rules and criteria for building based on that material composition. This would be in alignment with what the New Mexico Earth and Building Code is doing at the moment. And the advantage of this is that it would be easier for users of this standard to know the content of the materials that they're starting with, rather than the properties, having to go to a laboratory to get it tested for absorption amount and wet compressive strength. That's a bit costly. And I believe this would also be in alignment with the IBC that uses this language of stabilize, unstabilize. Our code has yet to include those definitions. I'd also like to request that the committees consider revising the tests that are required for earth and masonry units. Currently, we require testing for dry compressive strength, modulus of rupture, absorption, and wet compressive strength. The New Mexico Earth and Building Code only requires dry compressive strength and modulus of rupture. Those two only. I'd also like to request that the committees consider creating code for earth and masonry units that fall short of the required compressive and tensile strength. I know one builder in the community that has experimented with novel materials in his bricks, which have resulted in a higher tensile strength, but a lower compressive strength. I would ask if perhaps new wall sizing specifications be developed for those specific bricks that have lower strength, maybe by requiring a thicker wall and a shorter wall, potentially. I'd also like to request that the committees consider creating code for earthen roof assemblies, such as domes and vaults. Currently, we have several earthen domes and vaults that have been built in Pima County in recent years. And the path to gaining approval for these structures had been met with some opposition from structural engineers who do not have familiarity with these traditional geometries. And just as many look to earthen walls for improvements in in energy efficiency, health, lower embodied energy. These same benefits could be extended to earthen roof assemblies. It's their attractiveness. And just having a building code for these roof assemblies would give a more trouble-free pathway to permitting. And lastly, I'd like to inquire about the possibility of giving the committees access to any data from previous permit applications for earthen structures. My understanding is that there have been occasions where some builders and homeowners have struggled to receive a permit for their earthen structures. And I'm wondering if there's any record or data on the city or county's end as to the issues that may have delayed or prevented the granting of a permit for earthen structures. My hope would be that this information could help committees identify areas of the earthen building code that could be improved.
Okay, next. My name is Raymond Clements. My company is Natural Building Works. We're a design build company focusing on rammed earth, straw bale, natural plasters, healthy, low carbon, and high performing energy efficiency up to passive house standards. Also a passive house consultant. So a lot of the energy stuff you're talking about is resonating. So yeah, here for the earthen building code. I've been building in architecture school. 2005, we built a rammed earth house. And since then, I've caught the bug and have been chasing rammed earth since. In 2013, I started Natural Building Works to teach and build rammed earth. So just giving a little bit of my backstory, credibility. I put together about an hour and a half worth of brain dump, basically, on things that have been bothering me as I've been working for the past 15 years building with rammed earth. And most of the code is geared towards Adobe, I've seen, and their rammed earth section could be expanded and improved. I'd also like to offer my availability to work closely with the committees or even join a committee if that's an option. I've been in touch with a lot of the rammed earth builders around the world and can contact us or help us connect with people who've been doing this with stabilized or unstabilized work around the world and kind of connect the problems showing up and the innovations happening around Europe and other parts of the world. So I got 2 pages worth. I don't really want to need to spend the time on all of it. Maybe I'll just throw a couple at you and I can give this to the committee to take into consideration. But the first thing, I worked with an intern this summer and I gave him the code and said, here, design something. And the first thing was the STS number. Where's this STS number? And it's been really difficult to find since day one. I found something online that was like the decimal points were off and it didn't seem to work on those units. I got one time from Pima County and it was kind of just scratched on paper. So I think improving, that's such a big part of the code. It's like 5 of the 6 pages is the STS number and the wall sizes. So help improve that, please. Another piece, I think footing size calculation should be more prescriptive or available for us to figure out without an engineer. Bond beams have been kind of an issue. There's only a concrete bond beam and it can only span so far. And I think there are other options for wood bond beams in some of the other codes that I'd like to see brought into the Pima County. Some of these other codes are the New Mexico code, and New Zealand just updated theirs in 2024. And it's 3 different documents, 250 pages each kind of, and it's really, really substantial. I'd like to see some of that pulled into where it makes sense for Pima County. Putting earthback domes, including compressed earth blocks, include earthen floors, potentially lavacrete. These are some of these other earthen materials that are coming into play as lower carbon emissions materials are being more sought after. Soil is a mystery. Soil composition is like a mystery. You get a piece of soil from a landfill or from a gravel pit. You really don't know what's in it. They don't have the STIV analysis. So now we have to spend $300 multiple times to check it at the lab. Then only with really strong background in doing that a few times, understanding what's what. So I'd like to see some kind of guide or some kind of like, here's a range of what these soils should look like: gravel, sand, silt, clay, some supporting raw rammed earth or raw rammed earth is what I'll call it, and stabilized rammed earth. Stabilized and unstabilized is one way to put it, but I'd like to see it more as raw and stabilized. That's just the way I'm thinking about it. But yeah, some more guides on what soils are useful. There are soils you can buy at the yard in crushed gravel that you can buy it, put cement, you can build it. So more prescriptive soil content, I think. And just the last point here is I'm 100% supportive of raw rammed earth, but it can be really tricky. I tried it. I got to 240 PSI with some raw rammed earth native soil, really soft, not really worth building with. Put 3% cement, got to 440. It's really soft, not worth building with. So if the 300 PSI is this magical goal to get to, it's really kind of dangerous in a rammed earth without a plaster over the top of it. So I would offer PSI strength according to wall type. In the IRC, there are wall types with compressive strength chart. There's a chart and have it labeled in here. But I'd like to maybe see something like that for wall types, load bearing type, non-load bearing walls, yard walls, that kind of thing maybe. And so I'll stop there, and there's a lot more in here I'd like to share with the committee if there's a possibility.
So my name is Mimi Lovato, and I'm not a professional in the industry, but I'm an interested party coming at it from the perspective of health in the built environment and urban building specifically for human health, and kind of like a natural building materials, but just with a slightly different lens, a slightly different focus angle. And so I'm also interested in the re-democratization, in a sense, of urban building and giving it back to people. And part of that is the code facilitating the passing of knowledge and the passing of, we have thousands of years of experience and bank of knowledge all around the world. And we have in, every single continent a history of urban building. And I think there's a huge resource of knowledge to pull from and be able to make it so that a lot of this can stay outside of the cash economy, in a sense, if that makes sense, and bring it back to from the perspective of affordable building and affordable housing. And so that's kind of my interest area.
Nothing to say.
Anything about rammed earth?
Neither do I, yeah. I don't do Adobe or rammed earth, but it seems, we've got an industry that's got standards. So when I go buy a concrete block, I know what the strength is, I know what the ground is, the rebar, it's all under strict control, and we know precisely what that is. And when you're doing it on site, it seems like it creates some issues. right? In terms of quality control, what the ultimate outcome is gonna be. So generally, everything would require a larger safety margin because of the uncertainty.
This is Clayton. That is an accurate statement. To avoid laboratory testing and things of that nature, it puts an extra burden on the inspection staff or the municipal staff to verify the composition meets a minimum standard that can verify that. It's certainly not insurmountable, but it's something that we need to consider. And I would recommend, if possible, each of the three of you could put together a document in PDF form that we can distribute to the committee and interested parties so that we can start to build a target goal set that may stimulate committees or potential code amendments, so on and so forth. But if you could summarize your points, and send them to me and Dan Ice from Pima County, then we'll distribute accordingly, and then we can go from there. But we would love to hear more, and the city is certainly interested in supplementing our standardized and prescriptive codes to support this building type.
Well, it sounds like New Mexico is a little more current on that. Do we have access to their codes?
This is Clayton, yes. And just as a point of clarification, there is a few prescriptive approaches in the IRC for earth and materials. None of them are specific to Adobe Brick. But we also acknowledge that there are other standards that aren't in the IRC. Going back to 2006, the city of Tucson had earth and wall prescriptive measures in the IRC amendments that were ultimately transferred into an earth and building standard that's now maintained by Pima County. I don't believe that there's been any significant changes to that since 2006. So there is an opportunity there to update and get current. But if an applicant comes to us, we would be open and willing to accept alternative methods and materials according to the IBC Chapter 1 for New Mexico Earth and Building Standard, or some other, even potentially considering the New Zealand standard, depending on its content, as an alternative materials in the absence of prescriptive language that we would maintain currently.
So there's no national standard?
No, well, not for Adobe Bricks. So there is cob construction, which is essentially monolithic Adobe. And there are some prescriptive approaches, but not for specifically Adobe Bricks.
Right, okay. Like concrete, there's ACI that's all the standards. There's no national organization, so we're kind of on the bleeding edge here.
The Masonry Society has some Adobe standards in it, and there is movement towards adding language in the IBC through the Masonry Society. But the IBC does have standards for Adobe in it, but those are being updated.
Okay. And you do mostly residential and commercial?
Mostly residential, like commercial, build out, TI build out kind of things.
Okay. But both the IRC and IBC could potentially apply.
Correct. And then just, for what it's worth, alternative building materials are gaining interest. For example, the city of Tucson, as many of you may know, is supporting a bi-block, which is a plastic composition building material using recycled plastics. So just the concept of alternative building materials is of interest, and we'll do what we can to support.
And this is Thomas Hayes. I'd like to say that I did work with Ray Clemens on a custom home, and I was very impressed with how strong the building material is. Both the rammed earth and we did straw bale construction. And I was very impressed, and I think we need to be accepting of alternative building materials.
Well, we have to design the code not for the best builders, but for the worst builders, right?
Yeah, and I think
Unfortunately.
that's what I'm asking for, because I was there at some point, right? I'm right 20 years in now. So at some point I was looking for answers and I chased them down and found them, mostly through working with an engineer. But then the engineer is looking to the code also to help him do his thing.
Okay. But Dave Gibbons is working on this, Clayton, with other engineers. This group.
Yeah, he is working with Jennifer Petrowski. Or with the Structural Engineers Association.
This is Clayton. I am familiar that Dave is interested in updating some standards. I have not had the opportunity to have an in-depth conversation as to the extent of that work that he's working on or who all he's working with, but I do know that he is looking at the current standards.
Okay, because I'd be very interested in what he has to say as the structural engineer. Okay, any other further comments?
Dennis, I'll just make a quick comment, which is one, and this is not my area of expertise, but I heard the request to have some prescriptive standards that can be understood and the way I interpret it, that you do A, B, C, and D, you'll be able to get approved. And I think that's really applicable to all the stuff we're working on and not just this one issue, but I'm hearing it again. I hear it from a lot of places, a lot of the contractors say, you know, why is it so tough to have to comply? We should just tell us what to do, and the code should tell us what to do, and we'll do it.
Okay, can we move on to the next agenda item, which is future agenda? So is the hope to have this group come back with some specific recommendations for this committee, Clayton?
On earth and materials,
Right.
yes. I would even suggest that the committee consider a subcommittee or a focus group that could work directly with some individuals to identify both challenges and opportunities to improve our regional regulations.
Well, since Dave's not here, I volunteer.
I second that.
Yeah, I think that Dave's interested, so I'll let him take charge of that. And you've all worked with Dave Gibbons?
I haven't yet.
Okay, so he's a reasonable engineer as far as engineering goes. Okay. Any other future agenda items? So is Sarah coming back next time?
I might see you one more time, but I'll get you documentation prior,
Okay.
Jeffrey.
Good.
Thank you.
I mean, this needs to somehow coalesce in something that we can vote on as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we need to get some language. and
So-
vote on it.
How's that gonna get written?
So I think from the timeline perspective, we'll prepare a memorandum to our board to update on what has been discussed thus far and what we've landed on as a proposal in theme, with specific language that would have to be proposed at either September joint code committee meeting or subsequently October, but September to move forward to planning and zoning and then be considered by the board and mayor and council in October. So that would be, I think, the timeline on how the quickest timeline. We would update the board in the September 8th study session with a future discussion and approval by joint code in your September meeting, with it going to planning and zoning either late September or in October, and then it would have to go back to the.
And that would formalize our informal discussion today that the S occupancy, adjusting the square footage would be a thing. So you'll actually inform the board of that, and
Yep,
your sense that that is enough for what they're looking for, or are they?
I think we'll get input
Yeah.
from the data. And so one proposal would be that someone from joint code join the discussion at the study session.
Sure.
On all the considerations, because I think with 3 meetings, we have done a deep dive into all data, current data, proportionality of benefit to impact. And that this success begets success, and we take things like this is a good first step. And then as we get into the 2027 release of those codes, we're now thinking about those collective goals and we can continue to grow. So I think that's a really good story to tell. So I'll defer to the Joint Code Committee on attendance at that study session or some dialogue on that. And so I can give you that information. I'll be preparing the update memorandum to the board on those action items and that subsequent timeline. That will be distributed to Joint Code ideally end of next week. So that you have a couple weeks with it before that September discussion. And so we can be in contact on those things.
And potentially we'll have some code language for the next code committee meeting.
This is Clayton. Yeah, based on the information that we've discussed today, and the communication that Sarah will be preparing, we can use that to draft some proposed code language for the committee's consideration.
Okay.
So
Dan's lit up there. Dan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was just gonna say what Clayton said, so we'll work with Sarah to get the
Okay.
language.
And I want to thank the committee for allowing you to be a guest at all of your summer meetings. So it has been wonderful to open up this discussion.
So this is Ken. I guess my question is if we do approve something as early as September, is that early enough that it can go through all the process and then notify, I forget the agency who does the comm check by, because I'm assuming you would not adopt this till probably January 1 of 27. Even though we've approved it, it's going to take, need to notify, give everybody notification. Would they be able to adjust the comm check by then?
This is Clayton. I do not think so.
Okay.
In fact, it's been an effort to get the comm check custom designed for City of Tucson-Pima County, and they were pretty vocal about not wanting to change it once they developed it. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would probably not be a feature of comm check for some time.
Okay.
But we would, following your recommendation, if we take that to Mayor and Council, this Planning and Development Services would also recommend a delayed implementation, like we did with the code adoptions for both the building code and energy code thus far, to give that grace period for designers to come up to speed.
Okay. And this is Ken. And if you do want me to attend anything, just let me know and
Yeah.
see if my schedule will allow and I'll attend. Yeah.
That would be great. This is Sarah. I'll take this back to county administration this week and we'll debrief and get an item on the study session for September 8th. If it's a different study session, we will let you know.
Okay.
Because we'll get it agendized. And so if that timeline changes, I'll make sure the committee gets that updated timeline. Either way, you'll get this timeline and we'll let you know what study session is. Because we would love to have your participation and engagement in it. I think it would be wonderful.
Sure.
Any further discussion on future agenda items?
I would make a recommendation that we consider Mr. David Godlewski's recommendation at the beginning of this meeting from call to the audience for GFCI protection on HVAC equipment on a future agenda.
Okay. All right.
For next meeting.
For the next
one.
Right. Okay. And the rest of the committee didn't get the email I got this morning.
Correct.
Okay.
But following your recommendation to put a future agenda item on this topic, then I can work with Mr. Ice and we can prepare some materials for your consideration.
Okay. Good. All right. So we'll move on to item 7, the one we're all been waiting for, adjournment. Anyone care to make a motion?
You're a minute early.
This is Ken. I move to adjourn.
Second?
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.